Welcome back to another episode of Power Word Nerd.
2264. The mini-campaign. Winter in Piltover. The rising vampire threat brought the famous vampire hunter, Cancian Brightfire, to the town of Piltover in Moonronia. The town had been experiencing a missing persons epidemic, and many came to believe vampires were responsible. The town was fairly uninhabited, with no mayor or formal town council, but a rich nobleman lived in a mansion on the outskirts of the town. A wheelchair-bound man named Abado Pendleton. He beseeched Cancian Brightfire for aid. Cancian set out for Piltover and sent out a call for other aspiring vampire hunters to aid him in his investigations. A small group of men and women answered the call. Cross von Hamel, an undead avenger from the Order of the Ghastly Hollows. He went by the code name the Black Scythe and traveled to Piltover with his wraith assistant Lane. Dachel Shen, a high elf investigator, formerly from the Winronian Investigative Unit. Dachel devoted his life to combating evil and believed vampires may have been involved in the murders of his wife and children. Zeno Orella, a Crabman Simic hybrid and current leader of the Bloodraven Guild. Zeno possessed an amulet that granted him the power to wild shape into powerful creatures. Kenan Endara, a disgraced paladin and noble from Thaddeus. His family resided in the recently fallen Castle Nestor, which had mysteriously been razed to the ground. Kenan was a proud warrior and was intent on redeeming himself against the vampires. Giles. Long ago, he was sent on a mission by Nyef, the Tartaian Hand of the King, to research and destroy vampires. While researching the creatures at a monastery, his son and wife were slain by vampires seeking him out. Giles came to believe his childhood friend, Vladoro, had become a vampire and would be found in Piltover. In the years since his wife's death, he began to train a protege to aid him in destroying vampires. Suki Hervois. After learning her husband, Alcide, cheated on her with a vampire, Pam de Beaufort, she killed Pam and became a hunter of all vampires. Suki crafted a special magical bow, White Widow, that she used to kill her prey. She traveled to Piltover to continue her lust for destroying the evil creatures. Buffy. Trained by Giles in destroying vampires, Buffy came to Piltover to eliminate the vampire scourge and help make the world a better place. Xanalor Elrin, a man with many regrets in his past. Since becoming a paladin, Xanalor decided he would spend his life striving to vanquish evil from the world and atone for his past sins. Winifred Sanderson, a young witch that answered Cancian's call to destroy the vampires. She rides a mount, Salem, a unicorn familiar. When the vampire hunters met Cancian in the center of town, a snowstorm was already pounding Piltover and continued to throughout the night. The hunters learned there was a murder in the tavern the night before they arrived. Cancian handed the group some supplies, including an urn that could trap vampiric mist inside of it. After investigating the tavern, they learned the victim, Jeff Smithinson, was savagely hacked to pieces. The hunters spent some time at the tavern getting to know some of the townspeople. They met a young woman, Gretchen McNair, who smiled insanely and muttered nonsense about children and a child molester. The group met Brownbar Ingleton, a retired soldier with a missing arm. The group referred to Brownbar as the sheriff throughout the night for unknown reasons. The hunters met Jeffrey Lanetaker, the bartender at the tavern with a glass eye. Last, they spoke to Nixon Cartwright, the black handyman of the town with a helpful, friendly demeanor. Nixon told the party about bloody knives he found on the outskirts of town near the entrance to the woods. He also advised them he thought something strange was afoot at the Cather residence, as they supposedly took a trip to the capital, but he noticed nothing was packed when he was repairing a broken window inside the home. The hunters decided to visit the crypt in town and investigate the ghost they heard was there. They met the ghost, Gary Grew, and learned it was Cross von Hamel that killed him when he was mortal. Gary informed the group he was framed for the crime Cross executed him for, which was for poisoning townfolk. He claimed he was framed by Krog McCormick, an evil gnome alchemist. Zeno decided to stay behind with Nixon. Later, he threatened Nixon and bullied him into going for a walk and an interrogation. Zeno did not like the answers he received from the man as the two traveled together. Zeno murdered Nixon due to his dissatisfaction. Shortly after the murder, Zeno was approached by a flamboyant, Asian-looking figure. The figure noticed Zeno's amulet had an engraving of a blue rose and was adorned with sapphires. The figure smiled, as he was very familiar with this amulet, and activated it from afar. Zeno could feel his body change. Meanwhile, the rest of the group returned to the tavern and spoke further with the bartender, Jeffrey. Keenan threatened him and demanded the bartender escort the group to Obaro's mansion on the outskirts of town. Confused as to why he was being treated this way, Jeffrey led the hunters to Obaro's mansion. Upon arrival, the group found a fancy brass door knocker with a carving of a wrinkly old man's face on the huge wooden door. They attempted to enter the mansion to no avail, so they knocked. The butler, Pickensnail, answered the door with a muffled voice. He refused to allow the party into the mansion and told them the tavern closed days ago after the barkeep's murder. Realizing Jeffrey might be one of the vampires they sought, they interrogated him for a short time before killing him. Jeffrey was indeed a vampire spawn. The hunters heard a loud rumbling and were approached by a giant mammoth, alongside the flamboyant figure Zeno met. Dotchel was able to identify the man as Kata Jean, the subject he was investigating in Wolfendale when his family was murdered. It was revealed Kata Jean was a vampire. Kata and the mammoth attacked the hunters. Kata Jean placed Dotchel under a charm spell, forcing him to lose control of his body and approach Kata to make out. Kata Jean was forced to flee during the battle, and the mammoth was felled, wild shaping back into Zeno Orella after being defeated. The group learned Kata Jean had the power to force Zeno to wild shape. The group continued their investigations into the town, next traveling to the Cartwright household, which was Nixon's home. There they met Lana Cartwright, Nixon's wife. Keenan immediately interrogated Lana and attempted to intimidate information out of her. His hand slipped as he held his sword to her neck, and he accidentally pierced her throat with the tip of his blade. She laid on the ground bleeding out, but Xanalor acted quickly and stabilized the fatally injured woman, saving her from certain death. Speaking with Lana further, the vampire hunters learned the house had been haunted for the past 14 years by Gary Grew, the ghost they met in the crypt. The party looted the home, locating a fancy book about Kata Jean, the vampire they just met, and treasure hidden in a chest in the attic. Xanalor cast a spell in an attempt to track down Kata Jean. He and the rest of the party followed a magical trail to the Church of Temagorgos near Gary Grew's crypt. Inside the church, they met Father Otto, a priest. Father Otto was attacked and bit by Kata Jean in front of the group. Then the vampire forced Zeno to transform into a mammoth once again, causing massive damage inside the church. The hunters battled Kata Jean for a second time, this time defeating him and trapping his essence inside the urn they received from Cancian. Father Otto was stabilized by Xanalor, surviving the vampire bite. He thanked the group and handed a silver key and a book about the Order of the Endra to Xanalor. Several townsfolk that were worshipping in the church were left injured, and the church was partially destroyed from Zeno's mammoth transformation. Xanalor healed the injured and advised everyone in the church to stay there for safety. Before leaving, Keenan robbed the collection plate inside the damaged church. The vampire hunters searched the graveyard near the church and discovered one of the gravestones was labeled Gary Grew. The party dug up the grave and found a sealed brass urn. The stopper on the urn was removed, and the entire party was enveloped in a thick mist. When the mist cleared, they found they were transported to a pocket dimension inside the urn. The hunters were in the laboratory of Krog McCormick, a gnome in hiding, and the one responsible for Gary Grew's wrongful death. The room was filled with potions, bookcases, and a foreign arcane symbol was embedded on the ground. Krog attempted to bribe the party with potions to keep them at bay, but they attacked him anyway. The gnome threw a potion to the ground, causing a puff of smoke and the activation of the arcane symbol. A large demonic creature materialized, and the Krog fled around a corner to hide. The creature was powerful, but Giles's training left him more than prepared for this fight. He used ki-infused palm strikes to stun the creature and force it to the ground, where the rest of the party easily dispatched of it. Cross then threw Krog's many potions to the ground, causing a reddish gas to fill the room. The effects of the gas were resisted by all of the hunters except for Dotchel. Dotchel found himself afflicted with the urge to cannibalize human flesh. Krog was captured and executed by the party. After his death, Krog melted away into nothing, and another mist shrouded the hunters. When the mist cleared, they found themselves back in the graveyard. But beside them stood a leprechaun with orange hair and black robes. He said his name was Fromtaken, and the demonic creature the hunters killed was his patron. He explained he had a new patron in mind and wanted Kenan's help in obtaining the being's power. Fromtaken then asked Kenan how his wife was. Recognizing Fromtaken as a leprechaun that broke his promise to save his wife May from death, Kenan lashed out at him. Fromtaken laughed and disappeared in a puff of smoke. The vampire hunters split up to explore the town. Giles and Buffy investigated the Wilsons' house, finding 4 corpses in the basement. They appear to have been bitten by vampires. A short time later, Cross learned of the corpses and went to the Wilsons' house to examine them. He raised the corpses as undead slaves. Zeno traveled to the Piltover stables. He uncovered 4 scared children there, Timothy, Jimothy, Aiden, and Medaden. The children explained they were hiding from their father Jingjangle. They told Zeno Jingjangle was a drunk and abused them. Full of rage, Zeno left the stables and headed over to Jingjangle's small hovel. Meanwhile, Kenan, Winifred, and Sookie explored another residence. They uncovered a corpse in a bathtub that concealed treasure. They located another corpse in one of the bedrooms. There appeared to be something living inside the corpse, so Kenan hurled the corpse into the wall, causing it to explode. A horde of small spiders scrambled towards Kenan and Winifred. Winifred used the spell Thunderstep to easily kill all of the spiders at once. Xanalor returned to the well at the center of town to speak with Cancian, but found he was no longer there. From afar, he observed the front door to Abado's mansion was standing wide open. He journeyed inside. After briefly speaking with Pickensnail, the butler, Xanalor approached the staircase. At the top of the stairs, he saw an old man in a wheelchair call out to him. The old man told the paladin that Cancian was already inside the mansion. He was crotchety and unpleasant at first, but the old man invited Xanalor to come up the stairs. Xanalor ascended the staircase, finding the stairs to have a magical nature to them. When he made it to the top, he could not locate the old man, who he believed to be the nobleman Abado Pindleson, anywhere. As he searched for Abado, Xanalor discovered some unsettling documents. Xanalor quickly fled the mansion to find the others, believing Abado might have been turned into a vampire. Dotchel re-entered the tavern and slipped quietly into Jeff's room. Overcome with cannibalistic urges, Dotchel consumed much of Jeff's corpse. He slipped back out of the tavern covered in blood. While walking outside, Sookie's estranged lover, Alcide Hervois, approached her. He had been in the tavern, but the hunters did not speak with him. He observed Sookie walking around the town and built up the courage to seek her out. He asked Sookie for the bones of his unborn daughter so her soul could rest. Sookie had forged her bow with the bones of Alcide's daughter and his lover Pam. Alcide also explained to Sookie he was under the control of a powerful vampire, Kata Jean, and he did not intend to cheat on her with Pam de Beaufort. Sookie responded by cleaving his head off. Zeno ran into Xanalor, Kenan, Sookie, and Winifred, and convinced them to accompany him to Jingjangle's hovel. They explored the home. In the basement, Kenan found a chest that he took with him. The party came upon a children's bedroom, dark with lighted candles, with some pentagrams painted with blood and strange glyphs on the walls and floor. Jingjangle was found tied up and gagged in his bedroom closet. The hunters learned he might be an abuser, and he definitely admitted to beating his 4 children. Jingjangle claimed his children were lying to the party and were actually vampires themselves. He added they were doing some kind of dark ritual in their bedroom with a man whose voice he did not recognize. Zeno kept the man tied up and dragged him outside. The group escorted Jingjangle back to the stables to confront the children. When they made it there, the children were gone. Xanalor freed Jingjangle from his bindings and he began to run away. Keenan would not let this person escape, and he shot him with a crossbow in the back, killing the man. Keenan opened the chest and found a book inside. When he opened it, a piece of paper slipped out and fluttered over to Zeno. Zeno snatched the paper and read it, then began to act suspiciously. Keenan asked Zeno what the paper said, but Zeno ignored him and began to walk through the wet snowfall. Keenan raced to catch up with Zeno and snatched the paper from his hand. The piece of paper was soaked through and crumbling in Keenan's hands. He could only make out one word, Shen. Unbeknownst to the rest of the party, Zeno had discovered a page from the Contract of Blood, a list of targets Zeno's guild was sworn to assassinate. The targets on the page were as follows: Elisay Mandrid, Damon Shen, Tagani Nestor. Suki had noticed a gravestone earlier when the party was near the graveyard. The gravestone was labeled Bella Hervois. Zeno had dug up the grave and gathered Bella's bones. Suki decided she would honor Alcide's request and put the unborn child's soul to rest. She traveled back to the graveyard with Keenan. She disassembled her powerful bow, White Widow, and attempted to bury it with the rest of Bella's bones. Keenan and Suki were attacked by the child's cult spirit, and it proved to be quite formidable. Still, Suki and the powerful paladin were able to defeat the creature and lay Bella's spirit to rest. Xanalor noticed Dotchel's bloodstained clothes and became aware of his cannibalism. Xanalor cured him with holy magic. The hunters visited the Cather residence. When they arrived there, they observed an elderly woman, Mary Old Lady Cather, that enjoyed reading late at night. The party learned she was good friends with Abato and often borrowed his books. Zeno murdered her very quickly after meeting her because she was reading the book Baal, God of Murder. She was found to be taking care of her grandson. The hunters learned her grandson visited Abato's mansion with his parents, only to be returned by Pickensnail later that night. Pickensnail told Mary the child's parents had to travel to the capital, Wolfendale, on urgent business. The child was returned to her as an infant vampire. She had been feeding the baby blood to keep it nourished. After much debate over what to do with the child, there was an intense moral struggle between the hunters. Zeno utilized a special item he found, the Cube of Force, to keep the baby safe. Suki Hervois tricked Winifred Sanderson and Zeno, pretending to be on their side. Once she was safely within the protective cube, she managed to stab through the creature with her trident. Zeno laid the baby's corpse back into the crib. Keenan burned down the home a short time later. Suki's deception enraged Winifred, who challenged her to a fight to the death. The two began a life-or-death battle. Suki, who had disassembled her powerful bow to save Bella a short time earlier, fought well against Winifred. Despite this, Winifred's high-powered Eldritch Blasts proved to be too much for her opponent. Suki was defeated and killed by Winifred. The party was not aware of this at the time, but Winifred feigned her outrage at baby Cather's death. She intended to kill the vampire hunters to impress her father, the vampire of Lodoro. Next, the hunters happened upon the Entenario household. The family was eating dinner, despite it being 3 a.m. The party quickly discovered the 4 Entenarios were eating cooked human flesh. The vampire hunters fell upon the cannibals, and all 4 family members were purged by the party. Cross raised them as undead slaves. Keenan burned down the home. The vampire hunters split up once again. Giles, Cross, and Buffy set off to explore the town, while Winifred went out to seek out Vladoro and inform him she disposed of one of the hunters. Xanalor, Zeno, Keenan, and Dotchel traversed the path to the woods, following clues to discover Jeff's killer. Keenan became lost in the high winds and snowdrifts, but the others came upon a shack in the woods. A man wearing animal hides covered in blood was standing outside. They called out to him, but he quickly turned around and entered the shack. The group followed him inside, and he attacked in a bloodthirsty rage. The man became stronger and stronger as the battle raged on. Xanalor cast Calm Emotions on his opponent, and the man appeared to weaken. Realizing the man must be under some kind of curse, Xanalor used his holy magic to end the curse and the battle. The man explained his name was Barof, and he was a friend of Jeff Smithinson. He said he saw a vampire kill someone on the outskirts of town and came to Jeff to plan what to do. Barov said he and Jeff planned to warn the town, but a voice entered his head and he lost control of his body, murdering Jeff shortly after. The vampire hunters had also been hearing a voice periodically since coming to Piltover, then would subsequently see disturbing visions. While speaking with Barov, the voice entered their heads again, as well as Barov's. Barov screamed and his head exploded, killing him and showering the hunters with blood and brain matter. The voice identified himself as belonging to Abato Pindleson. He invited the hunters to come to the mansion. Before setting off to find Abato, the hunters returned to the tavern. When they arrived, they found the inside completely torn apart. Brown Bar was dead in a pool of his own blood, covered in vampire bites. Lana Cartwright and Gretchen were shaken up but still alive. They explained to the group Jing Jangle's 4 children attacked the tavern and murdered Brown Bar. The party led the 2 survivors back to the church for safety. Next, Zeno, Xanalor, Keenan, and Dotchel traveled to the mansion and entered. They immediately sought out Pickensnail. They found him in the first floor bathroom. Every fixture in the lavatory was gold, including the toilet, which Pickensnail was utilizing to poop. Zeno ripped Pickensnail off the toilet, leaving a trail of excrement behind, and forced him to follow along with the party, but not before giving him a swirly in the feces-filled bowl. The mansion appeared to be protected by magic and impervious to physical damage. The hunters uncovered documents and books indicating Abato was a very evil man and sought out vampirism to regain the ability to walk. The documents also taught the group Abato was a sadist and inventor. The party encountered elaborate puzzles and mechanisms as they traversed the mansion and searched for the nobleman. The party located the mansion library and the librarian, Agnes Peachbeard. Agnes was hard of hearing and spoke fondly of Mary Cather, the old woman Zeno murdered in town. She also mentioned one of Abato's servants, a girl called Bright Smile Elrin. Xanalor strongly suspected this girl to be his daughter Dahlia, but she sounded too young to be one and the same. The hunters uncovered an entrance through the mansion that led to dungeons underneath. Keenan, Dotchel, and Xanalor descended into the dungeons, while Zeno stayed behind. Zeno forced Agnes and Pickensnail into a secret compartment behind a revolving bookcase, then trapped them there. Zeno made sure they had no way to escape and eventually starved to death there. Then he hurriedly caught up with the other hunters. Meanwhile, in the town, Giles and Buffy encountered Naif. Years ago, Naif was the Tartane Hand of the King, and dispatched Giles to a monastery to research how to destroy vampires. Not too long after that, vampires came for Giles and his family. Giles had come to believe Naif had some culpability in this. Naif confirmed he was sired by Vladora and was now a vampire. Buffy and Giles battled Naif, but were easily defeated and killed. During the fight, Naif revealed he had telekinetic powers, could drink blood from open wounds at a distance, and could transform into a red-skinned, bloodlusted version of himself. Back in the dungeons under Abato's mansion, the group met a young girl, Vanessa, trying to lead them to treasure. After briefly interrogating the child, they came to believe she was a vampire. The group killed her and confirmed she was one of the evil creatures. The hunters continued through the dungeons, braving traps and puzzles and finding treasure. They came upon a strange painting affixed to one of the walls. The painting depicted a powerfully built male figure with a cape and long black hair. An old wrinkly man with liver spots sitting on a wheelchair. A fancy-looking man wearing a fancy blue shirt, red pants, and a golden staff. The party recognized this man as Cottagene. A lavishly dressed male figure with fancy Egyptian-style robes. A beautiful female figure wearing revealing Egyptian-style robes. Keenan recognized her as his deceased wife, May. A thin male figure in a plain black cloak. The painting was captioned, "The Family." The party continued through the dungeons and came across a room with a spiked pit in the middle. A tied-up man sat at the bottom of the pit. The woman called Bright Smile revealed herself to the hunters. She was Xanalor's daughter, Dahlia Elrin. Many years ago, Xanalor gave his daughter to a nobleman to be used for sex, before arranging to have him killed by a werewolf assassin. The man tied up at the bottom of the pit was Enigma Marquis. After Xanalor abandoned his old life, he turned Dahlia over to Enigma to be looked after. Enigma apparently later sold Dahlia to Abato, who tortured and later transformed her into a vampire to be his eternal slave. Dahlia called her father over to her to atone for his sins. She asked him to join her family of vampires: Vlodoro, Nosferatu, Naif, May, and Abato. Xanalor agreed, but instead of allowing Dahlia to turn him, he attacked her in an attempt to cleanse her soul of evil. A battle raged in the room, and Bright Smile revealed herself to be quite powerful. She used telekinetic abilities. She claimed she learned this power from the vampire Naif, to hurl Xanalor to the bottom of the pit. He was attacked by ravenous vampiric mists that were tearing his body to bloody bits. Thinking quickly, he casted Daylight, which killed the mists and weakened Dahlia. Xanalor ascended from the pit and defeated his undead daughter. He dumped out the contents of the urn that held Kata Jean, revealing Kata's mist had turned to harmless sand while in the magic container. Before Dahlia's mist was able to flee the hunters, Xanalor trapped it inside the now empty urn. Keenan confronted and slayed Enigma for his betrayal. Other party members took note that Zeno did little to contribute in the fighting. The group then continued to traverse the dungeons after the difficult battle. The hunters encountered trapped rooms, puzzles, treasures, and even Kata Jean's hidden coffin. While investigating Kata's coffin, Dottrell discovered a letter written by his wife and addressed to Kata. According to the letter, Dottrell's wife had fallen in love with Kata Jean prior to her murder, and she was planning to fake her death to be with Kata. Could she still be alive? Keenan and the others met an older man chained to a wall in the dungeon. This man was Tagani Nestor, Keenan's father. Tagani advised his son the vampires had recently sired him, but the Endra power in his blood was allowing him to resist the vampiric control for now. He beseeched his son to do him a mercy and destroy him before he lost control. Zeno, recognizing Tagani as one of the names on his contract, slew Tagani before Keenan had the opportunity. The two bickered over this, but Zeno convinced everyone he slayed Tagani for good reasons. A short time later, Zeno came upon a young boy, Skylar, chained to the walls of the dungeon. After determining the young boy was still human, Zeno freed him from the wall, but kept him in custody by escorting him about the dungeon with the chain. While controlling Skylar with the chain, Zeno attempted to open a door that was trapped with thunder magic. The thunder magic harmed Zeno to a small amount and killed the captive Skylar. After completing a puzzle, Framtaken appeared to Keenan in a mirror's reflection. He asked Keenan to help him acquire a new patron to replace the one the hunters killed in Krog's pocket dimension. Keenan shattered the mirror in a fury, but Framtaken continued to request Keenan's help and 1,000 reflections of broken glass on the ground. A contract appeared on a nearby table. It read, I, Framtaken, will grant your family power and the ability to destroy the vampires. Sign this contract and your bloodline will be eternally bound to the infernal and the abyssal. All I only ask is one thing in return. Your group destroyed my patron. I require another. The vampire progenitor will do as a replacement for the patron you slew. Agree to turn his powers over to me upon his defeat once an Indara bests him. Prick a finger, sign with your blood, the deal will be final. And there was an X and a spot to sign. Keenan refused to sign the contract and continued on through the dungeon with the others. The group came upon a female vampire chained to the walls of the dungeon. She claimed to be Vlodoro's wife, cast aside when he found a new lover, the Dracaran princess May Gaikon. The mention of his deceased wife confused and enraged Keenan, who then destroyed the undead creature. The party entered an inortly designed wooden door. When they stepped through the threshold, they found themselves in a large room. There were 6 vampires in black cloaks, standing silently against the walls. The 4 children Zeno met in the Piltover stables were there as well. So was the nobleman that owned the mansion above them, Abato Pendleson. Abato informed the party that the first vampire and coven leader, Vlodoro, wanted Abato to invite Cancian to Piltover. Cancian had slayed too many of Vlodoro's vampires, even potential coven members. Vlodoro planned for Cancian and other aspiring vampire hunters to travel to Piltover to save the town and ultimately die by his own hand. Abato revealed despite not having legs, he could move like wind, with flight. The 4 children were confirmed to be vampires as well, and powerful ones. Each child had powerful spells and unique abilities gained through a ritual performed by Nosferatu at Jingjangel's hovel. Abato and the 4 children of Abato attacked the vampire hunters. Zeno quickly activated his cube of force to protect the group. The children in Abato were unaware of the nature of Zeno's artifact, throwing a multitude of powerful spells at the party. The strong magic collided with tremendous force against the barrier Zeno created with his cube of force. Xanalor once again used his daylight spell to weaken the vampires and gain an advantage in the battle. Abato possessed 2 magical orbs that attacked the party and healed the vampires in the room, which became active as the battle began. Zeno wild-shaped into a fire elemental and set much of the room ablaze, harming enemies and allies alike. The 6 vampires watching the fight joined the battle after being attacked by Zeno with the flames. Zeno used his cube of force to push Medadin and another vampire through a door into the jail area of the dungeon. Kenan activated an artifact he possessed, creating a small castle out of thin air, destroying much of the room and slamming Abato and some of the other vampires into the walls of the dungeon with punishing force. The battle raged on, and the 5 black-clad vampires in the main room, as well as Jimothy, Timothy, and Aiden, were all slayed by Dotchel, Xanalor, and Kenan. Zeno fled to the jail area, leaving the other hunters to face Abato alone, and killing the last remaining black-clad vampire while facing off against Medadin. Back in the main room, Abato soared high above the castle Kenan created, launching powerful magic spells at the party. Kenan revealed the Endra energy flowing in his blood and the Endra abilities that he learned from Tagani. He engaged Abato in single combat 80 feet in the air high in the massive dungeon room. The green energy of his Endra power can be seen by all below. Kenan landed an Endra-charged killing blow, defeating Abato up above the castle. Abato crashed to the ground, then turned into vampiric mist. He materialized in his nearby coffin, where Kenan put him down for good. Medadin burst out of the door to the jail area and attempted to avenge her fallen master. Kenan used his channeled divinity to take control of Medadin and force her to fight for the vampire hunters. With the pitched battle over, the group entered the jail area and met a group of prisoners freshly freed from their cells by Zeno. The free prisoners were as follows. There was a petite woman with short blonde hair. Her name was Elise Mandred, maiden name Pendleton. There was a fierce-looking red-haired woman. She was chained around the neck to one of the walls in a jail cell. It looked like it was some kind of a leash. Her name was Margus Rayon. There was a fancily dressed high elf, Izum Cordova. There was a short-tempered halfling with a grizzled look. His name was Harkin Blue Touch Ambrosia. There was an Asian-looking man. He was very thin and he had a goatee. His forearms were covered in tattoos. His name was Takibi Yobu. And there was a very fancily dressed, highborn-looking human, Raynon Elsenthal. Also, there was a half-elf man. His clothes were dirty and well-worn. The figure had yellowed teeth, smudges of dirt and mud on his skin. The figure talked like a scumbag and was rude and very crass. His name was Damon Shen. The hunters learned that these prisoners were looked after by Dahlia and Pickensnail. Elise told the group she was invited by her grandfather, Abato, to visit him at the mansion with her husband, Joffrey Mandred, who trained at an Endra temple with Tagani Nestor to combat and destroy the vampire scourge. Joffrey refused to go, instead choosing to listen to the leaders at the temple. Tagani, who had always been enchanted by the young Elise, decided to sneak off with her to Piltover to visit her grandfather and investigate rumors of vampire activity. Shortly after arriving, Tagani and Elise learned Abato had tricked them and was a vampire himself. Abato learned of the Endra Temple and intended to weaken the order by murdering Joffrey. He turned Tagani into a vampire against his will and imprisoned Elise, planning to eventually convince her to choose to become a full-fledged vampire by her own free will. Dahlia delighted in inflicting pain on others and despised Abato for his attraction to children. She imprisoned Elisee in a cell with a known werewolf, hoping the werewolf would kill her. After learning her name and knowing Elisee was on his contract, Zeno caved her head in with a blunt force blow, killing her. The other vampire hunters were shocked and stunned at the sudden violence, but Zeno had been acting strangely since finding that piece of paper in town. The fancily dressed high elf and the fancily dressed human began to bicker. Both accused the other of working with the vampires and informing on the other prisoners. Izem told the group he was brother to the high elven queen of Dova. He traveled to Wolfendale on behalf of King Lorien, meeting with the master of diplomacy for Munronia, Raynon Elsenthal, a member of the Munronian royal family. Their meeting place was attacked by vampires. He and Raynon were taken hostage. Raynon advised the group he was the master of diplomacy on the royal council for the kingdom of Munronia, just as Izem said. He was meeting with the brother of the Queen of Dova to discuss Munronian-Dovan relations. He warned the party that Izem had been completely broken by the vampires and would do anything to gain their favor. The vampire hunters could not decide which one to believe and figured it would be easier to bring one of them with them and send the other away. They told Raynon to join them as they journeyed deeper into the dungeons. Izem scoffed at the hunters and accosted they would regret trusting Raynon. He left the jail area and exited the dungeons. Takibi explained Vladoro met him in Jisei years ago and was amazed by his powers. After becoming a vampire, Vladoro returned to Jisei and captured him. Vladoro was going to turn him into a vampire, but Kadajin and Nosferatu wanted him kept living so they could unlock the secrets in his blood, as he could summon familiars and manipulate flame without the use of magic. Nosferatu, and more recently Abado, had been experimenting on and torturing Takibi. The hunters convinced Takibi to join them. Harkin was the captain of Abado's ship during the ride over from Thaddeus to Munronia. He was disgusted with what Abado did to the children on the boat. Abado imprisoned him a year ago when they arrived in Munronia for speaking out against the abuse of children. Harkin was thrown into the dungeon when it was built. He explained to the party he and Dahlia fell in love before she was turned into a vampire. Dahlia became pregnant and had Harkin's child. She bribed Pickensnail with sexual favors to smuggle the infant girl out of Munronia to Antopia in Dova, which was Harkin's hometown. Xanalor was surprised to learn he had a granddaughter, Anastasia. Harkin decided to join the hunters in destroying the other vampires. Damon Shen was Dotchel's older brother. Dotchel knew of Damon's criminal activities and how much his actions hurt Dotchel's family name, so he treated Damon with disdain. Dotchel decided to join the Munronian investigative unit in Wolfendale to live a different life from his older brother. Damon explained he was imprisoned in the Wolfendale dungeon for a multitude of petty crime: theft, robbery, vagrancy, indecent exposure, etc. He stated Dahlia and the other vampires attacked the Munronian dungeons seeking the werewolf Margus. He was bewitched by Dahlia during the attack and helped lead her to Margus's location. As a thank you, Dahlia freed Damon as well, but she was keeping him locked up in this room until she decided what to do with Elisee and Margus. Damon said he heard someone named Farto was in the mansion above. Supposedly this person knew the location of a great dragon horde. He asked the party to help him find Farto and get the treasure. The party recalled Agnes mentioned a pet named Farto earlier when they were in the library. Before the party could decide what to do with Damon, Zeno killed him with a sudden strike, fulfilling his contract. When Zeno completed his contract, a sudden, violent wind kicked up, pushing everything about the room. A pink and white electric current became visible, and suddenly, bang! The sound of a thunder crackle. A swirling portal appeared before the party's eyes. A blue female tiefling in a black cloak stepped through, accompanied by a male tiefling in a plain brown cloak. She looked directly at Zeno and ignored all else. She snapped her fingers, and time was frozen in place. The only figures that could move were the two tieflings and Zeno. I am Zafala Mirashard, the Blades of Fate leader. This is my son, a member of my order. I owe Baal a debt and am here to pay in full. Are you the one called Zeno Orella? Zeno answered in the affirmative. You completed the single page from the contract of blood. That was in your possession, did you not? Yes, Zeno answered. This is the first time since the contract was created that the leader of your guild completed all names available. There are still many more pages out in the world, but you will never learn another name on the list, at least not in this lifetime. If you continue to traverse this dungeon, you will die. I come to offer you the chance at more names to complete the contract in full. Come with me through this portal. Leave your comrades and certain death behind. With Bretson and I, you will travel far into the future, to the kingdom of Dova. There you will meet one of your descendants, Maedross. You will meet the future leader of the Bloodraven Guild, Soren. You will find untold glory and riches. And you will continue to complete the contract amidst a great war. Decide now, for I have much left to do in time and history. Zeno decided to leave with Zavala. He walked through the portal and was gone. Time resumed. Margus was a member of the Bloodraven Guild and recognized Zeno as the leader. Zanalore recognized Margus as the assassin he hired to eliminate his former employer. She would have followed Zeno and done whatever he asked as they traversed the dungeon, but due to his egress, she decided to escape the dungeons and left. The vampire hunters continued further on through the dungeons, without Margus Rayon or Zeno Arella. Dachel Shen, Zanalore Elrin, Kenon Endara, Harkin Ambrosia, Raynon Elsenthal, Medaden, controlled still by Kenon, and Takibi Yobu pressed on. The hunters entered a large room that appeared quite different from the rest of the dungeon. The walls and floors were covered with moss and fungi. The air was thick and humid. There were some trees spread across the room. They looked out of place, like they belonged in a swampy marsh. There was a tall fountain, 15 feet off the ground, standing on 2 pillars. Red liquid spilled over the edge and fell to the ground below, pooling underneath and around the base of the fountain. There was a circle of corpses surrounding the fountain. The party recognized Giles and Buffy amongst the corpses. The left and right walls of the room were lined with figures. There were quite a few of them. The figures were revealed a short time later to be vampire spawn. There were 4 orbs on pedestals, 2 on each side of the room. They looked similar to Abados, but they did not glow red, and they were smaller. Each one glowed a different color, yellow, blue, pink, and green. Each orb had a different ability. 1 damaged the party. 1 healed all vampires in the room. 1 resurrected slain vampires one at a time. And 1 countered and canceled spells and abilities of the allied party. Straight across, at the far side of the room, was a stone slab with some pots on top of it, bubbling over with green liquid. To the right of the stone slab was a cauldron, also bubbling over with green liquid. To the left of the stone slab was a crystal ball on a pedestal. Behind the slab was a woman, sitting on a fancy upholstered chair. She was Winifred Sanderson. She appeared to be writing on parchment when the party walked in, but she put down her quill when she noticed them enter the room. Her trusty unicorn Salem stood near to her. A small fancy door was behind Winifred and Salem. Winifred revealed she was born in 2247, making her 17 years old. She had been training as a witch. She never met her father and knew it would take a lot to get him to notice her. She explained her father, Vladoro, fell in love with a witch with the surname Sanderson while visiting Thaddeus, and the witch gave birth to Winifred. I am half vampire, half witch. I am a daywalker. I can walk in the daylight like a human mortal, but I require humanoid blood for sustenance. Winifred continued she learned her father was likely in Piltover, after hearing about Cancian Brightfire looking for skilled vampire hunters to join him in a hunt. She decided to travel there to kill the vampire hunters and prove herself, hopefully becoming accepted as her father's daughter. Zanalore appealed to Winifred's humanity in an attempt to bring her to the side of light. He was nearly successful, but in the end she decided to join her father. A battle between Winifred and her minions versus the vampire hunters ensued. Black mists swirled around Winifred, placing her into excruciating pain. Thick blue veins covered her body and her eyes turned bloody red. The party heard an unfamiliar voice. I gave her a taste of power. To see to it you accepted her into the vampire hunting group. I became Winifred's patron. Abado and Cottagene failed me. Can you hunters defeat this daywalker as well? Winifred! I allow you to shed your humanity. Destroy these vampire hunters and unite with me, my daughter! Winifred mounted Salem and summoned a Chul, a barbed devil, and a bearded devil to fight on her side. The damage orb activated and harmed the hunters, killing Raynon Elsenthal instantly. As the fighting raged on, Cross von Hamel arrived and reunited with the hunters, with a small undead army in tow. He joined in the fighting, evening out the numbers a bit. During the battle, Takibi walked past one of the trees in the room and it came to life. It snatched him up off the ground and devoured him. The hunters quickly moved to slay the creature to save Takibi, but he was partially digested and killed before the beast was felled. Winifred assaulted the party with her powerful magic, destroying Medaden with a barrage of eldritch blasts. The vampires, devils, Salem, and orbs were all destroyed by the hunters. Finally, Keenan used his Endra powers to teleport and chase down the mobile Winifred, landing a killing blow on the deadly witch. Before leaving the room, Winifred's crystal ball, which now laid on the ground, activated. Images and sounds emanated from within it. You see images of an elderly man. He looks a lot like Xenalor, but is quite a bit older. The man smiles as he watches a teenage halfling practice with a sword and shield in the nearby training yard. The youth smiles as well. He seems very happy. The elderly man mouths, "I love you, great-grandson," and dies peacefully in his chair. The images are abruptly cut off by a blurry static. They flash to a brief image of current Xenalor dead on the ground, bleeding from deep, horrendous wounds. The room looks unfamiliar. There are heaps of gold, bookcases, a sword encased in stone, a throne, a crown, and other treasures amongst the fancy furniture. The image quickly cuts to the same halfling youth on a small boat. His expression is much different this time, full of frustration and fury. The boy looks very similar to Harkin, except very, very angry. He is looking towards a nearby island. His flowing robes and embroidered cape flap in the sea breeze. The halfling slowly raises his right hand into the air and snaps his fingers. Boom! Whoosh! An explosion of unrivaled immensity and force emanates from the center of the island. The shockwave from the blast pushes the small galley backwards, and a good bit of the sea recedes away. When everything settles, the halfling slowly pushes himself to his feet and dusts off his fancy raiment. He looks at his hands in wonder and thinks to himself, "It is done. The whole world will learn to fear my power and my name." Static blurs take over the crystal ball, followed by images of Keenan. The place he is in looks unfamiliar, desolate and barren. His body is engulfed in wave after wave of intense flame. He screams in agony as the inferno washes over his body. The images cut away to an old, well-built man with gray hair speaking to the familiar leprechaun, Fromtaken. "Zariel is done with him," Fromtaken says to the old man. The old man answers, "Good. I will train him for 1 year. I will hone his infernal abilities, and he will defeat Vladoro for you. But after you have your patron, this Endra champion belongs to me." replies Fromtaken, "as we agreed." More static. Dotchel's children are tied to chairs with rope. Their feet and hands are completely restrained. Blindfolds cover their eyes. They scream and cry, "Please, Mommy, don't do this! Don't hurt us, Mommy!" "If I can't have my cottagine, I have no desire to go on living. You are coming with me, my children," says Dotchel's wife. Smoke and intense heat fill the room. The sounds of crackling fire can be heard in the background. You can see a calendar nailed to the wall. It is the last day of Helm. The room fills with flame, and the children cry out in pain and despair as they burn to death with Dotchel's wife. The crystal ball ceases to show images and is now clear. Harkin looked to Xenalor. "You are Xenalor. You are Dahlia's father. You see what will happen to my daughter's son in the future if you aren't there to watch over him. I will stand in your place. Leave here and go to Anastasia." After dramatic deliberation and reflection, Dotchel and Xanalor decide to leave the dungeon. They must go on to save Dotchel's wife and children. Then Xanalor will travel to Dova to seek out his granddaughter. They will leave the vampires of Piltover to the capable hands of Keenan, Cross von Hamel, and Harkin. Dotchel and Xanalor egressed while the others pressed on. 2 paladins, one continuing the fight to redeem himself and his family, the other leaving to raise his grandchild. Both in search of redemption, their paths now split. They left swearing a vow of allegiance for all eternity. Indara and Elrin forever. And that is a quote by one of the players, Brian Dobler. Keenan uncovered writings from his deceased wife, May Gaikon, the former Dracaran princess. He learned she had fallen in love with Vladoro before her passing and feigned her death to leave Nestor and be with him. She was here in Piltover. She was a vampire. The hunters avoided more traps and solved more puzzles, before slaying 2 werewolves guarding a portcullis. The party went through the portcullis and into another room. There was a spiked grate just beyond the werewolves with an open door. They heard voices speaking in the room beyond. After entering the area, they observed a strange living space. There was gold, chests, bookshelves, fancy furnishings, art, and all kinds of treasures all over the area. From far across the cave, Cancian was bent over, facing away from the party. Cancian appeared to be crying. 4 figures faced him. There was a powerfully built male figure with a cape and long black hair, later determined to be Vladoro. There was a lavishly dressed male figure with fancy Egyptian-style robes, later determined to be Nosferatu. There was a beautiful female figure wearing revealing Egyptian-style robes. Keenan recognized her as May Gaikon, his supposedly dead wife. And there was a thin male figure in a plain black cloak. This was Naef, the creature that murdered Giles and Buffy. Vladoro spoke. "You seek vampires, no? Well, you have found me, you fool!" Cancian answered. How dare you, Vladoro? I can't live like this. Not like this. Please, kill me, please!" He sobbed uncontrollably. Vladoro spoke. "The peace of death is something you do not deserve. You slayed too many of my children. Now begone!" Cancian turned and walked to the back of the room. He faced the wall and did not move or speak. Naef raised his hand, and Keenan heard the gate and door near the werewolf slam shut. Vladoro spoke again. "That was not necessary, Naef. These mortals will not be going anywhere." Nosferatu looked across von Hamel. "You reek of death, human." He held up his amethyst ring, and it glowed brightly. He appeared to have done something. The Black Scythe spoke up. "My minions will destroy you." Cross motioned with his arms and cast haste. But on who? Keenan readied his steel. He had no interest in this vampire's words. He knew he would destroy the foul creature and his wife before the night ended. Once again, he heard the persistent voice of the leprechaun warlock Fromtaken enter his thoughts. "Sign the contract, young Indara. Sign it and you can defeat these vampires. Refuse and you will die." "I will never sign your paper," the Endra warrior thought. "You lied to me. You took my wife away. Once I kill Vladoro, you are next." Vladoro continued on. "We must increase in strength before we take Cortania. Have you heard of the Order of Dominance?" "Yes," answered Keenan, thinking of documents and books he had uncovered in Piltover, and this order's mention. "They are too strong to take on. They are the ones that truly rule Cortania. Vampires grow more powerful as they become older, eventually evolving into elder vampires. My plan was to form a strong coven, then bide my time. Eventually, we will make our move on the Order. But now, I must replace Abado and Kadajin. One of you may suffice. Do we have any volunteers?" After a brief moment, the Endric champion could wait no longer, and battle was joined. Keenan rushed forward, glowing with green Endra energy. He swung out with his blade, slicing towards Vladoro. He struck Vladoro with green Endra force and divine radiant power, combined in one. Surprised by the boy's strength, Vladoro responded. "Yes, the The power of the Endra God. Impressive, little human. It is important that you die here. A pink mist emanated from May's body and enveloped the battlefield, affecting Harkin's conviction in attacking the female vampire. Vladoro twirled his Sword of the Dark Realms. It glowed with black, evil energy. He swung it at Keenan, striking him in the chest. Oof! For the first time since coming to Piltover, a seed of doubt entered Keenan's mind. He did not expect this kind of power from the first vampire. What is this? Keenan thought, horrified. This isn't fair. This isn't fair! How am I supposed to win here? Fremtalken laughed in the Indara's head. It isn't too late, boy. Sign my contract. Never! Never! Keenan screamed within his own mind. Destroy them, Cross ordered his minions. The 12 zombie warriors charged forward to the back of the room, cornering the vampires. Keenan breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, I still have all this cannon fodder on my side. We can still do this. Cross moved forward as well, standing side by side with Keenan. Harkin stood back, conjuring 2 of his blue orbs, one in each hand. Without looking away from Nosferatu, Cross pulled out his vial of glue. This glue was magical in nature and took 1 minute to harden, and was all but impossible to remove once applied. The black scythe suddenly swung out his arm and smashed the vial. On Keenan's legs! What? Gasped the shocked and exasperated Keenan. Now! Hissed Cross von Hamel. The zombie horde rushed back towards Keenan and Harkin. Harkin was surrounded in an instant. He screamed in terror as knives, axes, and swords were raised into the air. They came down upon him, hacking his body to bloody bits. Keenan used his Endra energies to teleport away from the enemy. He tried to teleport through the grates, back out of the room, but some kind of barrier prevented him from escaping. He had made it to the closed door, but could not teleport any further away. Keenan grabbed the door handle and tried to turn it, finding it locked. He turned towards the enemy and saw the undead horde advancing towards him again. Cancian, Nosferatu, and Vladoro were cutting down undead that got in their way as the trio slowly walked towards Keenan. Nayef's muscles bulged and grew, and his skin turned a pinkish red, just as Keenan saw in the vision of Giles and Buffy's deaths. I will go down fighting like a warrior, thought Keenan, seemingly resigned to his fate. He reached down to once again draw out his blade, when the contract appeared in his hand instead. Sign it! Sign it! Pled Fremtalken. Sign it and you can destroy them! I will never sign your contract, Warlock, answered Keenan, as his body glowed green with Endra power. Keenan moved with incredible speed and destructive force, ripping and tearing through the zombies in a hurricane of green godly energy. But his pool of Endra power was finite. It did not take long before his energies were expended and he was panting, completely exhausted. A childlike frustration and despair washed over Keenan. He dropped his sword to the ground and pressed his back against the grating. The few remaining zombies parted to the side and the black scythe stepped forward. Cross von Hamel stopped a few feet away from the defeated Endra warrior and lifted up one hand. Why? Why did you do this? Demanded the Indara as he grabbed his sword off the ground and raised it up high, starting towards his former ally. Cross said nothing at all. A cold blue beam of frost shot out from his palm and struck Keenan and Indara square in the chest. Ice quickly crept and crackled around Keenan's body from the point of impact. No! Thought Keenan as his consciousness dimmed. Is this the end of my story? No! Screamed Fremtalken in Keenan's head. Sign the contract! Come to me! I have grand plans for you! No! But it was too late. The young Keenan could no longer hear him. Keenan and Indara's body completely froze in place, his sword raised high in defiance, frozen into a statue of ice. That was the end of the mini-campaign. Year 2264, Dachel Shen returned to his former home in Wolfendale with his ally, Xanalor Elrin. He found his children tied up, and his wife attempting to burn herself and the children alive. Dachel and Xanalor saved the Shen family from the flames. Dotchell rejoined the Munronian Investigative Unit and routed the corruption within the organization. He came to lead it after a short time. Dotchell spent his free time chronicling the history of Cortania and researching how to vanquish vampires. Year 2264. Isam Cordova returned to Cordova. He beseeched the king of Dova, Landon Eilheim Lorien, King Lorien I, to go to war with Munronia and the royal Elsenthal family. Isam was able to convince King Lorien to do so. Unbeknownst to the king, Isam was under the thrall of Nosferatu. Nosferatu wanted the two kingdoms to go to war so there would be fresh corpses for the vampires to reanimate and integrate into the undead army of Nazig.
Welcome back to another episode of Power Word Nerd.